Good morning. Looking at this question you submitted, the United States is operating above full employment. That is implying an inflationary gap. It means you're doing better than your potential. Your potential is represented by the long run aggregate supply curve, and our output levels are above that, which would be right here at aggregate demand and short run aggregate supply. Identify a fiscal policy tool that can solve the problem. Well, there's two fiscal policy tools that we usually discuss, and that's taxes and government spending. I put both answers, even though one would be acceptable. Increasing taxes or reducing government spending would decrease aggregate demand. And when we decrease aggregate demand, it would return our equilibrium back to full employment levels. Okay. So both of these are tools you'd use when we're in an inflationary gap. Using a correctly drawn aggregate demand, aggregate supply graph, and a loanable funds graph, show and explain how you identified each in the short run. Well, with the output and employment levels, when we engage in contractionary fiscal policy, which is what these tools are, that reduces aggregate demand. When aggregate demand is reduced, that means price levels fall, as I said here. It also means output falls, as I said here. And it also means employment levels are falling. Now, your unemployment would go up, but your employment levels would be falling because you're engaging in contractionary policy. Your goal here is designed to somewhat slow down the economy. And now you're saying, well, what does this have anything to do with interest rates? Well, government spending, deficit spending, has a lot to do with interest rates. When the government is reducing their demand for loans, which is what's going on here, they're not spending as much, and they're relying more maybe on taxes for their revenue. What's going to happen is that's going to decrease the demand for loans. As you can see on the loanable funds graph, when we decrease the demand for loans, the interest rate falls. And that's because when there's a decrease in demand for loans, there's a surplus of loans. And when there's a surplus of anything, shoes, backpacks, whatever, price falls. Well, what's the price of money? The interest rate. So when there's a reduction in demand for loans, and the government's the biggest borrower, that reduces demand, which reduces the interest rates. And it wants to know how that reduction in interest rate will impact the value of the dollar. So global foreign capital typically follows higher interest rates. So if our interest rates are going down, money is going to flee the United States, which means that the demand for our currency would decrease. They're going to go somewhere else where the interest rates are relatively higher, since our interest rates are falling. Okay, so money tends to follow higher interest rates. So that's why the demand for our currency would fall. And when the demand for our currency falls, our currency depreciates in value. Now, how does a depreciating dollar impact exports? Well, a depreciating currency makes our goods relatively cheaper compared to other goods, which means our exports will increase. Okay, if our currency was going up in value and it was an appreciating or stronger currency, that would actually help our imports and hurt our exports. But because our currency is depreciating, falling currencies are good for exports, which means your exports would go up because our goods are relatively cheaper. Well, I hope that was helpful.